So I'm here with Alice Pung, the author of Unpolished Gem and Her Father's Daughter. Welcome, Alice. Thank you for coming to talk to me.
Thank you for having me, Shalini.
Can you tell me a little bit about the two books that you've written?
Sure. So my first book is called Unpolished Gem, and that's a book about growing up from a Chinese Cambodian family in Australia. So my parents came to Australia in 1980 after Pol Pot's killing fields in Cambodia, and they thought it was a wonderful country. After what they'd survived, they thought Australia was a bit of a wonderland, so they named me Alice after Alice in Wonderland. And they came at an interesting time. So they came about 7 years after the last vestiges of the White Australia policy disappeared. So from 1901 to 1973, I think it was, Australia had a policy which aimed to keep the country white. And then after the Vietnam War, they'd already had migrants during the, after World War II from Europe and from Greece and from Italy. Ostensibly you could call those migrants sort of white, but after the Vietnam War you started to get a lot of Asian immigration coming into Australia because of a progressive government. So that's where my story is set.
Right, okay. And so you were born and brought up in Australia?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I was born in Australia a month after my parents got here.
Right.
And I went to Australian schools, and I work in Australia as a legal advisor. So, yeah, it's my home.
So how in the context of your parents' attitude to Australia and your attitude, what sort of differences and similarities or places of conflict did you find?
Oh, okay. So my parents' attitude to Australia was when they first arrived. This was literally the lucky country for them. It'd given them a new lease of life. Who knew how long they would be able to survive in Cambodia or in Vietnam or even in the Thai refugee camp. So when they came to Australia, my father is, like a lot of migrants, very patriotic towards Australia, to the point where, the irony is an Australian nationalist would consider my father's level of patriotism quite an admirable level. They wanted us to be brought up Australian while maintaining some Chinese culture. Now the problem was he survived a war, so he also had post-traumatic stress, and Chinese Cambodians and Vietnamese who survived the war, they're very tight insular family groups, and they live in particular suburbs in Melbourne where there's a high concentration of Southeast Asian migrants. So they wanted us to assimilate in school, but also simultaneously go back to this very narrow and very small, comfortable world where you lived with extended family and you married another nice Chinese person. And for me, that was difficult because when I went to school, by the age of 8, when my grandmother stopped living with us, my thoughts changed from being in Chinese to being in English. And that was a big shift. I started to think like an Australian, and that's a language I write in and the language I think in. And also as an adolescent, your parents have different expectations of you than you do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in the process of your writing, was part of it dealing with these differences, or how did you end up wanting to write? So you obviously do other work as well, so...
Yeah. Oh, well, writing was something I always did. It was almost therapeutic when I was small, even though I didn't know what that meant, because I'm the oldest of 4 siblings. Now in Cambodia, it's very normal for the eldest child to look after the youngest ones, and when you visit Cambodia, you see all these kids playing with each other, and each child of school age will have a baby sister on their back and a little baby in a wheelbarrow. So it's normal to play with kids of different ages. In Australia, it was difficult because my friends would come over and I'd have babies with me and they didn't understand. They'd say, just give her to your mum. But mum was always working. And it was the frustration of being in this remarkable position of being 8 years old and having a baby to look after, which is not remarkable in Cambodia, but in the confines of suburban Australia, that got me first writing, just out of frustration because, 8-year-olds find it hard to control themselves. So that's how I got to write. It made me feel better about my circumstances, and that's how I continue.
Okay. And how did your family view your work? Was it difficult bridging the sort of gap between? Do they feel like, for example, if I think about my family, which is remarkably similar to yours, it's quite hard to. They were quite closed in many ways. So to be telling family stories is not viewed very positively.
No.
What sort of experience did you have?
Well, I'm very lucky to have the family I did. So my dad and my mum realised I wrote out of love. And even though the stories were funny and embarrassing, they understood that at a deep level. And the beauty of writing in English is that a lot of their friends their age couldn't read my books, but their school-age children could, you see. So I write for a different generation, and a lot of people who read my books are Anglo-Australians, ladies in book clubs, older people,
Yeah.
you know. So it doesn't have that big a deal on the very closed insular Southeast Asian community, but it affects their children, which I suppose is a good thing.
Yeah.